Thanks for joining us. This is your host, Taylor Bradley, and you're listening to the Troop HR podcast. Hello, all. This is your host, Taylor Bradley. This week, I might have a little bit of a raspy voice because I'm getting over a cold, but we're going to push through. Today, I'm joined by Rebecca Taylor, who has a decade plus of HR and talent acquisition experience. She's also a founding member of Troop HR, and about 6 years ago, co-founded the company SkillCycle. In her first role at SkillCycle, she took on the role of COO, which has evolved into the Chief Customer Officer. Rebecca, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Taylor. I'm in the same boat as you. My allergies are also activated today, so I apologize for any raspiness that I bring to the conversation.
We coordinated the allergies just to make sure that we're both on the same page. I do appreciate you partnering in with me on that one. But the topic at hand today is going to be an exciting one. We're going to talk about COOs and the intersection of working with HR leaders. And Rebecca has an amazing background. Rebecca, do you just want to give us a TLDR of your background and how you have experience in both of these realms?
Yeah. So in my current position, I'm a co-founder and chief customer officer at a company called SkillCycle. I always say when I started at the very beginning of my career, I very much grew up in HR. So my first role was an employee benefits intern at a corporate life insurance company that happened very much by accident. I was just placed in employee benefits and understood. It was the first time that I ever learned that HR existed, that there was like a whole department of a company that was specifically focused on the people and figuring out how to make the work experience the best for the people there. I spent some time as a learning and development coordinator at Lord & Taylor Fifth Avenue. May it rest in peace. I miss it every day. And then worked my way into recruiting. So I spent time as an agency recruiter, went in-house, grew into talent acquisition manager. And it was in that sort of transition, that sort of growing from recruitment into talent acquisition managers, when I met my co-founder of SkillCycle and my current CEO. So that was where my career really took this big pivot, where I started to really own all of people operations, moving through this early stage startup space and building HR infrastructures at these organizations. So my most recent HR role was, I think, 6 years ago now, right before we founded SkillCycle. And a lot of the positions that I had in HR involved working with a smaller group of individuals, companies that were maybe 50 people at most, but really partnering at a very close way with the COO and the CEO to make decisions around what employees needed, what benefits we were bringing in, how we were hiring, how we were developing. And it naturally became the role that when we co-founded SkillCycle, my co-founder stepped into the CEO position and I naturally fell into that COO role. I spent about 5 years as a COO at SkillCycle. And what we actually did was we rebranded. So we started as a company called Go Coach. We rebranded to SkillCycle last year. And with that rebrand came a new age of growth and development. And so I actually transitioned out of the COO role, transitioned to my current position, which is Chief Customer Officer. And our other co-founder, our third co-founder, actually stepped into the COO role. So I've been through it from those early stages, recognized sort of ways that I had to figure out how to do a lot of it on my own. And then now work again in partnership with us shoulder to shoulder in a strangely full circle way.
The perfect experience for this particular podcast. So when we think of Chief Operating Officer, I recognize there's going to be just an academic definition for the role. But now that you've been in it, what is the practical 2 or 3 things of how you would describe a COO and what they do?
It's a role that has so much nuance that it changes depending on the company that you're working in. And the thing that it's probably the most similar to is actually HR, where a CEO is the person in the company that really drives the vision and is really that person with the idea, with the concept, with the, this is where we're going. The COO is the person that says, okay, here's how we're going to get. So they're very much that, it's very much that role that's in charge of manifesting the vision of the CEO, building the car that they're going to drive in, how they're going to get to what that promised land is, making sure that they have all of the teams in line and in place to execute and to deliver on what they need. But importantly, that they can also come up high enough to know how it's working and be able to see, okay, are all of these departments working together? Are we achieving the objectives that we set to? Did we set the right goals? And how do I partner better with the people underneath me to make sure that they're each owning their piece of the puzzle to continue to deliver at the top?
And with that, there's already a list of things going through my head of how we partner with COOs and the operations teams within my business I speak to daily.
Mhm.
Because we're so aligned. What are some of the key areas that you work with HR leaders in this space or in your role as a COO?
It's interesting because increasingly we've seen HR rolling underneath the COO at an organization. The COO is okay. If it can't be the CEO, this makes the most sense. So when HR is working with a COO and when you're thinking about this is like, how are we thinking about what we're trying to achieve as an organization? And how do I in HR, what piece of this do I? So if a COO is looking at sort of company performance and saying, we have to hit this revenue goal, we have to build this product, we have to attain these results, then there are going to be different people that sort of fall underneath that and different teams that are responsible for owning the sales part, the product part, the results part. And the thread that kind of joins all that together is that each of those departments involves employees and it involves people to do those different jobs. And so HR and the COO are the only two leaders and departments at an organization that touch everything, even if they're not in charge of everything. And so where HR and the COO's partnership really comes in is in driving a lot of that top line strategy. And I always say that sometimes HR will come to the table with the COO and they're on opposite sides of the table. So HR will say, people need this, people are looking for this. And a COO will say, I don't understand why we have to do that. I don't understand the business case for why we have to do that. And so this happens to us when we talk to customers all the time. Customers are like, I believe in this thing. I don't know how to get my COO to believe in it too. And so what you have is two people who own a lot of the components of the organization that are driving success, that want the same things, but don't necessarily know how they're supposed to get there together. And the best thing to do from an HR perspective is to leverage the things that we're really good at, those soft skills, that EQ, that ability to empathize and understand and communicate, really lean into those soft skills that makes HR really great at understanding what people need and help that to get themselves to the same side of the table as the COO. It means understanding more about the high level business strategies that keep the COO up at night. If HR is able to understand some of the business reasons why a COO might want to improve the way that a company is doing something like managing performance, for example, you're going to have a better way of positioning your strategy to support that. So whether that's about training people differently, hiring people differently, rewriting job descriptions, revamping compensation levels, all the different projects that HR does, tying them to those things that a COO is thinking about and what keeps them up at night is the way that you're going to all realize, oh, we are trying to get to the same thing. We're just thinking about different ways how to get there.
That language nuance is an important call out when you're trying to work with the business. We've gone through the past several years. I keep hearing business acumen, and that's exceptionally important. But it's also, to your point, that translation between HR talk and business talk and meeting them in the middle is an important API or dialogue to have with the business. And it reminds me of an article that you were quoted in, I believe, October of 2023. You had indicated that you have to prove that with every dollar you spend, you're going to make X amount of dollars in return. And that can be difficult for some HR leaders to wrap their head around. We need to make business related decisions that also benefit employees. But what advice would you have on how to position the data or what data you would want to see from one of your HR leaders when making a CapEx request or a request for additional headcount for the HR team?
Yeah. So in order to provide ROI data, you have to start with data. So if you're trying to procure additional headcount, let's say you're trying to get justification to open up recs so you can start to hire in different departments. If you're starting with, we have to open this job, let's figure out how to do that, you're starting probably 3 steps behind where you need. But if you're starting with a business case for hiring these individuals, you're going to have a better way to prove that hiring those individuals was the right move or the way that you did it was the most impactful way to do it. So before you ever think about bringing in an initiative, make sure that you know where the company is doing well So no, what are the things that we're really killing right now? Are we beating our competition? Are we innovating on products faster than others are? What are the things that we're just absolutely killing? And what are the things that could kill us? There's a lot of companies right now that have gone through layoffs or acquisitions or things that involve big upsets and shakes within the culture and within people's workload. So if you're looking at your employees after a layoff, typically you're working with the positions that you need done that are absolutely mission critical for achieving the next milestone of the company. Now, in HR, you can look at these sort of populations and say, okay, so what are the exercises that we can do that can help us figure out what we have to do if someone here leaves? It's thinking about through those what if scenarios by hanging them on that biggest pain of what the company's thinking about. We might not hit our goals. The whole reason we did this layoff was to do these things to achieve this metric. There's a lot of ifs. There's a lot of things that could move around that could be sometimes within a company's control that HR, they have the opportunity to be proactive to close those gaps before they really become big issues. But it's hard because HR lives a lot in reactive mode. So it's reacting to everybody's quitting and now we're trying to figure out why, or reacting to, I don't know, like anything that's sort of any fires, just what HR is always trying to put out. And that's not even the fault of HR necessarily. It's like the dysfunction of the organizations that we work in, right? The best way to start to think about how to work through that is to really understand your business and to say, what are our biggest mandates? What are the things that we know we're going to prove to our shareholders that we're doing our job well? What's going to increase our stock prices? What's going to make our board happy? Being like, if you're top line HR, you have to know that information because even just as an executive, you're responsible for executing on that.
In one of our former episodes, Melanie Nofrano from Athena had talked about just approaching it with humility and also curiosity. That will typically unlock those relationships in that data. You mentioned layoffs, and that's been one top of mind for folks. The HR community as a whole missed a lot of the warning signs when you're hiring, especially bulk hiring. If you're actually looking at the financial data, there's going to be a point of diminishing returns. And even something as simple, which is a rudimentary metric, revenue per head count, is an easy way to look directionally and say something's up. We're adding more and more headcount that's not being sustained by either profitability or revenue growth. And that's going to lead to a layoff. Being in tune to that, I think, is something that's critical for our listeners. Now, I'm also part of the CNBC Workforce Executive Council, and we have the privilege of working with other groups such as the CEO Council to get their input on how they feel the HR community as a whole has been operating. And some of the critical feedback that we've received from the CEO and the CFO groups has been HR has become a little bit disjointed from the objectives of the business. So not specific to your organization, but the HR community at large. Where do you feel there are 2 or 3 opportunities for us to be better aligned? Because I do view the relationship between the company and its employees as symbiotic. One success is intrinsically linked to the other. So how do we foster that culture while staying true to what our objectives are?
Yeah, this is a really good question and one that I don't even know if I have a full answer to. Just sort of my take on it and what I would think. So being disconnected from the business in that way does have major repercussions, right? I don't necessarily agree that HR is the only one that's supposed to realize that, right? So if HR is maybe owning a piece of hiring or a piece of recruiting, they're the ones that are the actual decision makers because they're not, unless they're hiring for their own team, right? They're not going up to a hiring manager and saying, I'm going to hire 10 people for your team today because I'm just in the mood to do that. Here's the thing. They can kind of step up in this area, but I know that they do and they get dismissed. So if HR is being asked to do something that they don't necessarily agree with, like if they say hire 20 people in sales right now, it doesn't hurt to ask why, right? It's like, what's the business case for that? And HR can be dismissed. So, and I don't mean to speak about a department like it's a person, right? Like HR, there's obviously so many nuances and what this is, but it's easy to get dismissed and told it doesn't matter why. This is what we're doing. This is the objective. Just go out and do it. And it takes a certain level of comfort with conflict to push back on that and to push back on that in a productive way. There's something to be said for leading with conviction and saying, it's my job here to make sure that the things that we're doing are contributing meaningfully to our business returns and what we're trying to do. So help me understand, why are we hiring this headcount? What's expected of them? How quickly are we expected to see results from this? And that's going to help me as a leader better guide as to the velocity in which we should hire people. Maybe we don't need the amount of people that you're saying.
Completely agree with that. And some of the key takeaways, being dismissed can be for a variety of reasons. I had a former colleague of mine at a previous organization ask what was their team known for in the new organization that they went to. And they were really excited to say, the thing that we're known for is Ice Cream Thursdays. And I'm like, that's great. That's cool. But I feel like that's doing it wrong, right? That shouldn't be the work product, because that's how you get dismissed. And it's not to say that those types of employee engagements have their place, but if you're not aligned to the business, if you're not balancing that symbiotic relationship, I feel like you're probably more prone to be dismissed. As a serious business partner, it is a balance in that a tough one, and there's opportunities to improve. One other thought that popped into my head is there's also the L&D piece, which in many organizations I've been a part of, at times can be too theoretical or abstract, or again, not aligning to what the business needs. So what quick opportunities do you feel, if we're going to be training managers to help bridge that gap between HR talk and business outcomes, what are some practical trainings that we can do to help bridge that gap, to show that we're here for not just the employees, but also to drive business results?
Yeah, I love this question. So before we even start with trainings, it starts with assessment. So it's the same thing. In order to get your plan, you have to know what you're trying to correct or what you're trying to embellish and what you're trying to do. So the TLDR is that companies are basically looking at what they're calling either a skills inventory or a skills catalog for their company that says, in order to work here, these are the skills that people need to have. And depending on how large or how small your organization is, those skills can be as broad as communication and as narrow as can code in Ruby. It's just this concept of saying, okay, these are all the things, all the skills and all the competencies that people need to have in order to perform the function that they have to perform in order to achieve the outcomes that the organization is attempting to achieve. If you're looking at manager training, or you're looking at the development of people to help them come better together, you have to take a look at and think about those key core skills and competencies that are required for the company in order to function. And it doesn't have to be like this extremely exhaustive exercise at first. Like, you can start with 3. If you're just building your skill inventory for the first time, you can start with 3. I'll give it to you. You've got communication, you've got change management, and you've got leadership. Those are 3 core skills at any organization that have to be present. When you start with thinking about those skills, look at how they're defined. So you say, okay, communication, how do we define communication? The ability to communicate with people, right? Let's keep it broad. But then from there, once you have the definition, you have to look at, how does communication show up in our organization? What are the witnessable behaviors that people exhibit that determine whether or not they're communicating at a competent level to say that they're good at it? Is it that they can write an email that is persuasive? Is it that they can translate ideas across departments? Can tech explain to sales what the product does in a language that they can each understand? So defining sort of those specific behaviors that align with those skills is the next stage. Then what you're going to do is you want to run an assessment across either your whole organization, a sample size, like depending on the volume that you're thinking. I always recommend starting at least with the people at your company who manage people. So your whatever you call them, leaders, managers, extended leadership, anyone who's responsible for someone who works for them. Assess how competent they are in those specific skills. We built a platform that does it. You can say, let's say what they are. Let's define them. Let people see how they stack up. Let's let them get feedback from others to verify how they stack up. And then that's when you get a good assessment of your skills inventory for that group of people that you've assessed. So you might say, we're pretty strong on communication. We're not that great on change management. What components of change management are we failing? You look at those specific behaviors and say, some of us are good at this, some of this are not so great at. And when you translate these assessments into almost like a heat map, who's stacking up where, then you can start to address the different learnings that each group needs, each individual needs to close that gap that they're missing. Because when a company just leads with training, like if they say, we need manager training, these are the topics we're going to do, you're instantly going to lose people. Because some people might be really good at something that other people aren't. And if you're sitting in a training that you're like, I've heard all this before, I know all this, you're going to lose credibility in your training program. They're going to say, how would I not think that I have to lead people this way? I've been leading people for 20 years. If you can say, this is the specific piece of this we want to get you better at, and here's how we can reassess this, here's what we expect, that's when you're going to get more meaningful training, development, and learning.
And this framework partnered with, we recently on a previous episode talked about the Tuckman model. Encourage listeners to go back and listen to that. I think if you pair both of these, it will help you create that sustainable, high performing team that we all strive to achieve. Now, before we get to the lightning round questions, I have one personal journey question that I want to chat with you about. In a prior episode, Sherry Chernak mentioned that you need to be the majority shareholder of your career, because if you succeed that to someone else, you may go down a career path or career ladder that you really don't want to be a part of. And what I find really interesting in your journey is you've made this transition from HR to a COO role, which I've personally have been getting encouraged by people to go down. And I want to start first with a quote that you had from a prior interview is, I'm quoting you here, our brains are wonderful, but also kind of funny jerks because they tell us that we're not qualified for something. Could you expand on that advice and how you decided, I'm actually going to make this career transition to COO? And it sounds like you just thoroughly enjoyed that transition as well.
I'll have to start this by saying that when you look at what I've done, or like when I talk about my experience and what I've done, it all sounds all well and good when you're looking back on it. You're like, oh yes, this is how I tell my founder journey. This is how I say this is what happened.
Good.
If I knew that's how it was happening in the moment, I didn't. Like, it's like, I'm going to try this and see if it works. And if it doesn't, then I'm going to figure something else out. And then that becomes my journey. And I have a lot of those along the way too. You just don't get told as part of the whole thing. We talk about ourselves as if we've done nothing but achieve and we've done nothing but accomplish. And we tend to forget or shoot over the things that we're like, oh, this is where I stepped down. This is where I stumbled. This is where it wasn't working true. And the cycle in all of this that really has allowed my career to become what it is that I've been incredibly privileged. I've had wonderful people who, I'm not allowed to curse in here, give a hoot about me, right? Whether it's a boss who hired me because I just was so burned out from a job hunt that I was very honest with her in my interview and said, I just want to work my butt off and earn my way somewhere. I've had a lot of people who've helped me along the way, and acknowledging my privilege in that is a very important part of the conversation. But when I talk about our brains being really funny jerks, is that it's imposter syndrome, right? It's like we're constantly thinking, oh, that could never be me. Because when you look at other people doing this, they just look like they know what they're doing. They're talking about themselves and their job. I wouldn't even know how to talk about that. I black out half the time that I'm on panels because I'm answering a question and I'm just like, oh, I hope that I'm saying the right things and that I deserve to be in this conversation with these people. And then afterwards, they're just like, wow, that was really good insight. And I'm like, I had good insight. I feel like 1,000 things more about this topic than you do. And so we're funny jerks because like people who know a lot about what they know about don't feel the same way about themselves that we feel about them. And so we don't feel the same way about ourselves that people feel about us. So as you're kind of going through you're the main shareholder in your job experience and in your work experience, I think there's a balance to that because I graduated college as an English major with a degree in creative and professional writing. I got my first job because I needed a job and no one would hire me except the people who did. I graduated in a recession. It was kind of like my loans are coming in. I just need money. So I just need a job. And there's a lot of happy accidents that did happen along the way early on in my career. And if I thought that I knew what was right for me from the very beginning, I would have been still probably pursuing writing jobs that may not have been the thing for me. I wouldn't be here. But I do think there's also another important part of building trust around other mentors around you, other people around you who can suggest paths for you to try. Because if you say, I know exactly what I'm doing all the time and I'm going to go chase it, you don't know what you could be missing that could work out for you. My co-founder and I have been together for 10 years now because we're in different jobs and in different ways that we've done this. And there's so many times where we've looked at each other and we've been like, did we choose to end up here or did we just end up here? We just did the next. And I think there's an element of that is important when you're thinking about your job journey is like, sometimes you know what it is that you're doing, but sometimes you just have to do the next step and just see where it takes you. And you don't have to constantly be on this trajectory of confidence and upward. Sometimes I'm going to try this and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. But I think the key to that is just knowing that you can make it work at the most fundamental way for you, which is like kind of pay your bills. Because I was definitely one of those founders where I couldn't work for free. I had to be making a specific salary the whole time. And if I couldn't do it through my business that I was founding, I found like I was doing contract recruiting on the side to make some money while I was doing it because just failing and not earning income was not an option for me. So there is a way to do it when you're in the thick of it, but it's not easy and it's not glamorous. And you don't always know that that's what's happening while it's happening.
You rarely don't. The backward looking movie version of our lives always looks so choreographed.
Oh, yeah.
And they knew what they were doing. For me, when I went from being a firefighter paramedic into recruiting and HR for the first time, honestly, it was just better hours and better pay for my family. And so it wasn't this unique light bulb moment. And one thing that I love about having the privilege of being on this podcast or doing these panels that you talked about is you get to be open with your vulnerability. So emerging HR professionals know that it's not perfect. And imposter syndrome, at least in my case, it never leaves. When I joined that CNBC Workforce Council, I was sitting in a room with CHROs of Fortune 100 companies thinking to myself, what am I doing here? They have got the wrong person. And so that never goes away, but you go with it. And then it makes this really interesting journey. And what I love about the HR community as a whole is it's a community. No matter the level, there's generally the open arms. We're all in this together. We all, as you started this episode, you fell into HR, right? It was just this role. And I feel like we all say that. I just fell into this role. And it is a great privilege to be a part of.
Yeah.
So the final thing I'll walk us through here to close us out is the lightning round.
I'm ready. Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. You've given some great advice so far. What is one sentence, the best career advice you could give to our listeners?
Try as much as you can. Say yes to opportunities. Be like, yeah, I'll try this thing that you're introducing to me. Try this technology. Try this project. Try this excursion. Just try as much as you can because you don't know what you're going to like. You don't know what you're going to hate. You don't know what you're going to find and you don't know what you're going to learn.
I totally agree with that. And I encourage anyone considering HR, try being a recruiter for a little bit. You learn so much about
everything,
the industry.
Yep. And about jobs. I didn't even know. I mean, I was literally an English major. I thought the jobs that I could get were writing for the New Yorker and living at the Dakota, which do not usually go hand in hand, I learned.
Next up, what is your favorite HR tool or book right now?
Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. It's the one that it's like an old one that everyone's has read, but it's one that is taken for granted. There's so many great conversation frameworks in there in terms of navigating conflict, persuading people, trying to build cases for things that you're trying to do.
And for the listeners, as always, we'll put that in the description. All right. One hot take HR opinion.
I've gotten yelled at for this one before. Work-life balance is a skill. It's not a circumstance. And it's a skill that is not always available for everybody to learn because of different levels of access to it. So not dismissing that some people don't have work-life balance because of circumstance. For like 80% of us it is. And it's about kind of understanding how to set boundaries, understanding what to say yes to, what to say no to. So not, what to try, how to try it. But it's a skill that's really important to learn because The same way you have to be a stakeholder in your own career, you have to be the project manager of your own life. And you have to kind of understand how much of your life you want to dedicate to the things that you do for your profession and how much of that you want to dedicate to the things that you do for your life. Sometimes those day-to-day things, those tasks might overlap. I'm not talking about like work-life integration. I'm talking about the amount of time that you spend in each of those headspaces with those specific people. It's a skill to learn. If you don't learn it, you're going to burn out. And I burned out way more times than I can count before I learned how to balance this as a skill.
I've been there with you, so I'll support it. So in case you catch any grief, I'm there with you on that one. Final question for you is, how can our listeners connect with you and your organization?
Yeah. So definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Rebecca Taylor. I'm the co-founder, chief customer officer at SkillCycle's. So you'll find me there. If you're in the Troop community, I'm in the Troop community too. So please say hi. I'm constantly setting up time with Troop members, just like chat. I'm going to be at the Troop HR retreat in Naples at the end of this month. So please, if you're there, say hi. I'm fun. I'm friendly. I promise. Or you can follow SkillCycle on LinkedIn and see what we're posting. We post a lot of content that's meant to be thought-provoking. We're really trying to add a lot of value to followers and to community. So follow us on LinkedIn, or you can email me, Rebecca@skillcycle.com.
Awesome. Rebecca, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Taylor. Thanks for having me. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Troop HR podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. If you would like to learn more about our community, please visit troophr.com. In the meantime, keep living the dream.